after me. I'm a man. I'm 40.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Nick DiMartino from the Empty the Bench podcast network. Of course, I have a lot to get off my chest about this Jets-Bills game. It was just... let's just put it this way. There's a lot to get to, from the penalties to the coaching, the officiating, the offense, the defense, every little thing. I think that there was, I think I don't only blame one side or the other. There's plenty of blame to go around in this game. Let me just start by saying I was there. I was at that game. So I felt the energy in the room, in the stadium, completely collapse. To start, the Jets defense was terrible to start in the first half. The Bills completely bullied them. The Jets defensive line is terrible. Michael Clemens does not look like an NFL player out there. Michael Clemens has been just terrible. I mean, by the way, let me just say, this is like perfect proof that the Jets never should have traded John Franklin Myers for a 6th-round pick. The stupidest thing I could have imagined. And now our defensive line is just terrible. The Jets do not have a good pass rusher. They were not able to contain Josh Allen at all. To me, some of that was just completely unacceptable. I do think the offense looked a little bit better than it did previously, but the defense looked substantially worse. The defense did not look good at all. The Jets are a terribly undisciplined team. They are talented. They do have a lot of talent, but they're a very undisciplined team, which is just so obvious from all the penalties. All the penalties, and not just a lot of penalties, but crucial penalties. Like every big play, there was a penalty. The Jets' offensive line on both sides, the offensive and defensive lines, have just been putrid. They've been terrible. The Jets' defense was supposed to be their thing. The Jets' defense is so overrated. So overrated, but there's plenty of blame to go around. Look, Aaron Rodgers, I guess he could have played better, but he's a 40-year-old quarterback, threw for almost 300 yards. And that doesn't include the fact that there were also, some really crucial drops, some plays that they should have made. Darius Rucker, which would have been a first down. Garrett Wilson, that catch in the end zone. Both of those were tough plays. For Garrett Wilson, he's your number one target. If you're going to be the number one target, I kind of expect you to make that catch in a way. I get that it's a tough behind the shoulder sort of catch, but the best wide receivers in the NFL, great wide receivers, make that catch. Garrett Wilson is supposed to be a great wide receiver. He's the Jets' number one target. I expect him to make that catch. Breece Hall, he rushed for over 100 yards, and he's actually receiving a lot too. He's been using the pass game a lot, but it looks like Breece Hall really has lost a step. This is not the same Breece Hall as in 2022. That could have just been a fluke of a season or half a season, but he does not look the same. Breece Hall looks like he's running slow. It looks like he doesn't look like the same player that he was just a few years ago. Just the penalties, the stupid penalties. Every big play, there was some type of hold, or there was, I mean, remember that play with Garrett Wilson where there was a pass interference. Aaron Rodgers threw the ball like 50 yards down the field, and it was a clear pass interference, and the Jets would get the ball midfield. Of course, at that same play, there was an illegal formation, which then and both penalties offset. Are you kidding me? Like, just in that moment, you're going to have illegal formation where both sides offset. It's like, it's essentially like a 50-yard penalty for the Jets almost, and like a 5-yard penalty for the Bills. How do you do that in that situation? So many the offensive line has been disgraceful. Defensive line, disgraceful. The Jets need a pass rusher. They need a pass rusher. They were not able to contain Josh Allen at all. I mean, in a weird way, the Jets almost remind me of, like, not to make this too much about college football, but they remind me of like USC and Miami, and not in good ways. They remind me of USC because their offensive line and defensive lines are both just bad, and they remind me of Miami because of all the penalties, all the stupid penalties. And by the way, the Bills were like that too. The Bills had a lot of dumb penalties that game also. The kicking was terrible. I mean, in fairness, everybody wants to blame Greg Zuerlein. I mean, I agree. Greg Zuerlein deserves a lot of blame, but he's just one of many things that went wrong. It's just sort of like if you wrote a script for the Jets, and it's like if you wrote a script for the Jets and you were just to include a whole bunch of things that they were going to do wrong. Greg Zuerlein missing 2 easy field goals, hitting the upright twice in a row, that would have been a part of it. But let's not forget that on that drive, I think it was the first field goal that he missed, that he hit the upright in, which was like a very easy field goal, very easy, like 30 yards. And don't forget that drive, Braylon Allen scored a touchdown, but it was called back because of holding on Tyron Smith, which was first a bit. Look, the officiating in that game was terrible. I'm not the first to say this. Everybody seems to agree the officiating was terrible, and it happened to both sides. I'm not saying the refs had the Bills or anything like that. It happened on both sides. They were really they were very, very ticky-tacky with every little thing. There were a lot of holding calls where I look at the replay and I was like, I can't even really figure out where the hold is. Sometimes you think there's not holding, but then you look at the replay and then, oh, that's an obvious hold. That very often that was not happening in this game with really dumb holding calls, not to mention terrible roughing the passer calls on both sides. I mean, the one, Javon Kinlaw, by the way, I don't know what he's doing out there. He had 3 penalties. 3 total. Those 3 of the 11 penalties, more than a quarter of the penalties were on Kinlaw. One of them, he cursed out an official, it seems like, because which was the stupidest penalty you can get. That's even dumber than delay of game. One of them lining up in the neutral zone, maybe the second stupidest penalty you can get, was on Kinlaw, and cursing out an official, which it seemed it was inappropriate to talk to an official, the ref said. So it's probably what it was. We all wanted to do that, but you have to control yourself. You can't be cursing out officials and getting 15-yard penalties. And the roughing the passer, again, it was stupid. I don't know, it was a ref's show. The refs, I don't complain about officiating very much. I rarely ever blame officiating, and I'm not even blaming officiating for the loss. Like the Jets, the Jets, I think, did enough themselves to blow the game for me to not blame the officiating. For me to blame the officiating. It's just that the officiating was bad, and it helped and hurt it helped and hurt both sides. For instance, just that Epinesa unnecessary roughness call on 4th down on Rodgers was so ridiculous. And it gave the Jets an automatic first down. That was a huge break for the Jets that they never should have gotten. And then Breece Hall goes on this big run. And by the way, Breece Hall should have scored on that. Breece Hall should have scored a touchdown. He had one more guy to beat. If he turns in, he easily should be able to score a touchdown. I don't think Breece Hall's the same player that he was. I think 2 years ago at this time, Breece Hall scores that touchdown. That was just terrible. I think I mentioned the drop on the first drive from Breece Hall on third down, which would have been a first down. That could have changed the trajectory of the game. Garrett Wilson has to catch that. Although I have a lot less to complain about with Garrett Wilson than some other guys. But that Braylon Allen, I think that in the third quarter, that Tyron Smith penalty killed them. When Tyron Smith gets called for holding, Braylon Allen is practically in the end zone. And I get it was a bit ticky-tacky, but the thing is, Tyron Smith is a veteran offensive lineman. He's a Hall of Famer, probably. Veteran offensive lineman who who was a huge offseason pickup for the Jets this season. And he has the experience, and he should, not to mention the fact that, like, they were calling this all game. They were calling these types of things all game. And Tyron Smith knew it. We all knew it. Everybody in the stadium knew it. So he should have known not to do that. Just that killed the Jets. And then that don't forget, that was when Greg Zuerlein hit the upright. So that's 7 points right there that the Jets could have had. That's 7 points right there. So people can say, well, the Hail Mary kept us in the game. And it did. And I think it did, which, by the way, was an unbelievable play. Like the best way to end the half. And since I was there, like when you're at the game, maybe if you're watching on TV, it's a little different. But if you're at the game, it's a lot harder to tell what happens on a play like that. I mean, I just assumed there was no way anybody caught it. I was like, there's no way anybody on the Jets actually caught this. There's no way the Bills defense let that happen. And it turned out afterwards, oh my God, Lazard, like I think the first ref that I saw signaled it was not a touchdown. And then the next ref said touchdown. And the place went nuts. And then I saw the replay and I saw that he actually had caught it. I was like, oh my God, how did he actually catch that? It just felt sort of surreal to me. I mean, I don't think Rodgers played a terrible game or anything like that. Everybody, look, Aaron Rodgers played the way I expected him to be honest. He's a Hall of Fame quarterback, but is 40 years old. You can only expect so much from him. I mean, like, obviously he's not going to outplay Josh Allen. He's not as mobile as he once was, although he still has a pretty big arm. He can still make pretty big plays. He can still make long throws, which is a huge thing. Obviously, he's not as good as he was at Green Bay. I don't think Aaron Rodgers really played such a terrible game. By the way, I will give some credit. Allen Lazard actually looked pretty good at this game. He's finally looking a little bit more like his old self. I mean, before Allen Lazard was terrible. But honestly, Allen Lazard played a pretty good game by Allen Lazard standards for sure. And so I got to give him some credit, but there was so much blame to go around. The penalties, the kicking. I mean, first, the kicking was bad on both sides, to be fair. It was bad on both sides. Bills fans could say the same thing about Tyler Bass, who actually missed an extra point. I mean, that, like, one of the drives when Greg Zuerlein hit the upright, that we never even should have settled for the field goal there. Never should have even settled for it. Braylon Allen was practically almost in the end zone. Tyron Smith holds the defense. It gets called for holding. Probably wouldn't have had any effect on the play anyway. So that's 7 points right there. We never should have even settled for the field goal. In fact, I remember I was there and I was like, well, maybe, all right. I was thinking, like, all right, it sucks we have to settle for this field goal, but at least we get 3 points out of it. Like, that's what I thought, because it was such an easy field goal. And the kicking was bad on both sides. I think it had a lot to do with the wind. I really do think it had a lot to do with the wind, with the Tyler Bass missed field goal and extra point. That's what it's like. If the kicking is really bad on both sides like that, it probably does have a lot to do with the wind. Come on. I felt like I was watching a college game with the kicking being this bad. I mean, Greg Zuerlein, if a college kicker did, and college football is known for having terrible kicking. If that happened in a college game, I'd be upset. If I had money on that team, or if you're a fan of that team, you'd be pissed off at that. In college, let alone in the NFL, And Greg Zuerlein, it's like, okay, he missed the 51-yard field goal against Denver. He did. He missed the 51-yard field goal. I wasn't too mad at him for it, to be honest, because first of all, it's a 51-yard field goal. But in today's NFL, that goes in maybe 80, 90% of the time. It's not too much to ask that your kicker can make a 51-yard field goal. It's not that difficult anymore, assuming there's not just insane weather conditions. You should be able to make a 51-yard field goal. I think but, you know, it was also against the Broncos. The Jets should have been able to score more than 9 points against Denver. That was just a terrible loss. But, you know, and not to mention, the Jets also got lucky that Denver missed an easier field goal the drive before. So it's not like the Jets outgained Denver, but it outplayed them. And then Greg Zuerlein just missed an easy field goal. Like, all right, fine. I can live with that. But that on top of 2 easy chip shot field goals, hitting the upright 2 in a row. How does that happen? How do you hit the upright 2 times in a row? That just is, just if he makes, those 2 things combined just make me so pissed off that the kicking has been this bad. You know, we do have to get to some of this other stuff, like Mike Williams, that final play of the game. I mean, look, I get that he was open and everything, and, you know, you got to do what you got to do. The Jets were sort of in desperation mode at that point, which, by the way, again, another break the Jets kind of had when they called that, when basically they called it a forward pass when they initially called it a fumble and the Bills recovered. That would have been the game right there. In fairness, I think it probably was the right rule call by the definition of the rule book. Realistic because his arm was going forward. Do I think he was actually throwing a pass? No, I don't. I don't think anybody who saw that play actually thought it was a forward pass. It wasn't, realistically. Realistically, it was not. Nobody in their right mind actually couldn't look at that play and say he was passing just because his arm was moving forward. But by the rule book, that probably is the correct call. But then with Mike Williams, who, by the way, has been useless. I mean, Mike Williams can't make himself useful. Mike Williams has been horrible since he's been on the Jets. I guess that's a common theme of this video, I guess, is that a lot of formerly good players are not very good on the Jets, or formerly good Jet players are not as good as they were. He trips and that ball gets intercepted. He trips. The most Jets way to end that game. In fact, I actually thought he caught it when I was at the game, because when you're on TV, when you're watching on TV, it's a little more obvious. But when I was there, I thought he caught it. Actually, and I thought the Jets actually had a bit of a chance. Now, forget the game, whatever. It happened. That's 3 games in a row. They should have been able to win. 2, they absolutely should have won. They should have beaten Denver. They should have beaten Minnesota. Buffalo's a better team than the Jets. I don't doubt that, but that doesn't mean you can't beat a team that's better than you, especially in your own stadium. But I'll say, is the season over? I mean, no, the season is not over by any means. I mean, let me just say this. I think the Jets are very fortunate that they play in the AFC and not the NFC. I mean, when you look at all of the most disappointing teams this season, most of them have been in the AFC. Most of them are AFC teams. When you look at the Jaguars, the Browns, the Jets, I guess you could say, the Bengals, so many, like when you look at the biggest disappointments this year, I mean, I know you're going to think the Panthers, but they're not really much of a disappointment as much as they're just bad. But they're not necessarily that big of a disappointment. But most of the worst teams, I mean, when you look at the worst teams in the NFL right now, other than the Panthers, pretty much all of them are in the AFC. And when you look at, outside of the division winners, probable division winners, I should say, the Ravens, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Texans in the AFC, all the wild card teams are not convincingly good. Some of them have better records than the Jets, sure. when you look at a team, like when you look at all of the teams they're going to be competing with, all of them are beatable to the wild card. I mean, you're telling me the Jets can't get the third wild card spot? I mean, look at their competition. Their competition is not great. The Jets are not having a good season, but you don't have to, so far at least, but you don't have to have a good season to make the playoffs. You really don't. You can have a pretty average season. I think this is, you can have an average season or below average season. So anyway, just by the way, I like the Jets getting Devontae Adams. I like it. I like them getting Devontae Adams. It was, I mean, they gave up a third round pick. They gave up practically nothing for him, which, I mean, I like that move. There's nothing wrong with getting an extra wide receiver, especially when your receiving core just sucks, is terrible, especially one who's familiar with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I would agree if you were like, that's a bad move. You gave up a whole bunch, but they didn't sacrifice much. So I don't know. That's not such a bad move. So I like that move, I'd have to say. So, and yeah, that's just, I'm just worried as how I would put it. I would say I'm worried. It's just sort of like, it's one of those things where the Jets kind of have to get it together. And if they get it together, I think they actually have a real shot. But there's a good chance they won't get it together. And, it's just sort of like, okay, what will they do? And, just because the season's not over doesn't mean I have to be happy with how things are going. And a 2-4 record from the way they've been playing has just not been good. It's just, they've been a huge disappointment. I also want to get to the Mets a little bit. The Mets are tied with the Dodgers at 1-1. By the way, let me just say, the Jets ruined what would have been a pretty incredible day for me. A Mets playoff win and a Jets win to take first place against the Bills. I can't think of any other time that would have happened. So the Jets ruined that for me. But the Mets are tied with the Dodgers at 1-1. I have been, I mean, obviously, me, along with every other Met fan, has been very happy with what the Mets have done. I mean, I was at the game last Tuesday, mostly a low stress game, but I thought it was just, it felt really good to be there. Other than when Maton came in the game, there was a little bit of stress there. And Phil Maton, when you look up stress in the dictionary, Phil Maton's face comes up, and it was just so great to beat the Phillies. That just felt amazing. The Mets were essentially a buzzsaw to the Phillies that series. I mean, game one against the Dodgers, I don't know what Mendoza was thinking starting Kodai Senga, who ended up going 1 1/3 innings. He gave up like 6 runs in 1 inning. That was just a dumb move, I think. I think that was just a bad move and ended up worse than we could have even imagined it. That was a bad move. That game was tough. But I will say, now that the game's tied 1-1 and the Mets took one in Los Angeles on the road, I feel a bit better about the series. I do think the Dodgers are obviously a much more talented team, but the Mets right now look like they're hot. I mean, by the way, I just want to say, when Lindor hit that grand slam against the Phillies, which was incredible, like it was the most chilling moment I've ever had as a sports fan, just for one of my teams. It was like, I've never felt like so, there were chills down my spine when I saw that grand slam. If you look, I mean, I'm really glad I went to the game on Tuesday, but if I had been there on Wednesday, to see the grand slam, that would have been incredible. That would have been such a surreal moment. And not to mention the Vientos grand slam early in the game against the Dodgers. It was, players are just hitting. It seems like the Mets are hitting really well. I mean, that's 2 grand slams the Mets have hit in the past week, which I was just elated with when I saw that. And I mean, so the Mets tomorrow night go back to Citi Field, and I am a little worried because Severino is pitching. At the same time, Walker Buehler is pitching for the Dodgers. Now, before the Mets played the Dodgers, I didn't really follow the Dodgers in the playoffs that much. But I'm looking at his postseason ERA. It's like his postseason ERA is like very, very high. His post and so it looks like he might also be a little bit of a. All right, so I have it in front of me right now. His postseason ERA is 10.8. So he hasn't been very good when he's pitched this postseason. I mean, Severino is a good pitcher. He's the Mets' number one pitcher in the rotation, but he's notorious for being a weak. He's notorious for being a weak postseason pitcher. He's not the best postseason pitcher. As for the game last night, or yesterday, I should say, before the Jet game, which, by the way, I was just worried on my way to the Jet game. I was listening to the Met game the whole time, a little bit worried because, I mean, even though they ended up winning, thank God the Mets offense really clicked early in the game because that could have been bad. I mean, don't forget that one inning when I think it was the sixth inning when Maton was in the game. Everybody wants to blame Maton, but there were two errors, one by Iglesias and one by Alonso in one inning, which could have been very costly to them. And that would have been like if the Mets had blown that game, that would have just, I don't know, that would have sucked the life out of me. Not just out of me, but out of the team, possibly. That would have been really, really bad. But tying it up 1-1 is just okay. I feel okay about it. Like I don't expect to beat the Dodgers, but I feel okay about it. Diaz going in the ninth. By the way, Carlos Mendoza does seem to have a lot of faith in Diaz. And to be honest, for the most part, it's kind of worked. I mean, I think Mendoza sometimes leaves in his relief pitchers a little too long, namely Maton against the Brewers in game 2. I'm not against him going to Maton. He left him in too long. And him going to Diaz in the 7th. I mean, Diaz gives us all heart attacks. But I'll say, I think him going to Diaz in the 7th inning against the Brewers could have saved the Mets season. Him going to Diaz really early, I remember I was like, wait, they're going to Diaz already? It's the 7th inning. It seemed like a desperation move. The season felt over. That could have ended up saving the season. So Carlos Mendoza believing in Edwin Diaz might not really be such a bad thing. That could have certainly saved the season against the Brewers in game 3 against the Brewers. But of course, Edwin Diaz feels the need to load the bases and give us all a heart attack before saving the game, which, you know, he's not the same as the 2022 Edwin Diaz, but I don't know. I'm much more worried about Severino because Severino does choke a lot in the playoffs. I mean, the game 1 against the Brewers when the Mets won, Severino was terrible in the first couple of innings. So I'm a little worried about that. Overall, I guess you could say I'm excited in a way, also just very worried. It's weird seeing 5 o'clock games. I'm not used to that in a sense. I work overnights. It's hard for me to get up for those games, but you know, whatever. I hope I can go to another game, but you know, the tickets are just probably very expensive. All right. So moving the goalpost comes back next week. So that is, these are my thoughts on the Mets and the Jets. I'll be back next week. We'll talk a bit more about it.